In this video, I will show you how to create an entire workflow that consists of creating new invoices, adding items to the invoice, and downloading an invoice using Caspio's PDF feature. Let's take a look at a live example so that you know exactly what we plan on developing. So here's an example of a Caspio data page that displays a list of customers. If I want to create an invoice for each customer, I can go to the link above here to create a new invoice. And from here, I can select the name of my customer from the drop-down list. Let's say we go to Tim. It's going to auto-populate Tim's information. And in these two fields, I can set my issue date. So let's say today, and I can set my payment due date to be end of month, for example. And upon submission of the form, I'm going to send the invoice ID to the report. And from here, we're going to be able to track all the items on that invoice. So for example, I can select parts. I can say maybe quantity 3, and let's maybe input a description, for example, light switch. And let's just say each light switch is $9.99. We're going to add that to our invoice. Let's also track installation for labor. So I'm going to select labor here, and let's say it took us 1 hour to install all of these switches. I'm going to call this installation, and let's say we charge $75 per hour. We're going to hit add. And now you can see how we can add all of these line items one at a time. Once you're done adding all of your items to your invoice, you can generate the invoice now. And this invoice is going to display the company information here at the top, who you're sending this invoice to, the invoice ID, date issued, and also the payment date. And it also groups and consolidates all of your data inside the report. Now, if I want to download this into a PDF document, I can click on the link here. And the way I have it set up is to open up a new tab, and it's going to place all of that information onto a printable PDF document. And from here, I can either print this or download it to my files, and I can also send it to my client to be able to review the invoice. If you want to modify this invoice, let's say you need to make some updates to it, you can go back to your application, go back to customers. Let's quickly find Tim. So there's Timothy Ellis. I can go to prior invoices and be able to pull up that existing invoice that we created just a minute ago. I can open it, and here I can modify the invoice, I can add additional items, I can remove items, and I can once again generate the invoice if I need to update it and send the updated version of my invoice back to my client. So now let's go into Caspio and let's see how we can go about creating this entire workflow. Let's begin by creating a brand new application. All we need to do is click on this link here to the left. And now you have two options on how you can begin building your applications. You can start by importing data. So if you have some data offline, let's say in Excel or Access database, you can bring all of your tables and data into Caspio, and then you can build your applications on top of your data. In today's video, we're going to build this application starting from a blank template. So I'm going to click on this button here to the right. Next step is very simple. You just have to give your application a name. So if you need to build a CRM, you can call it CRM. If your application calls for managing service requests, you can call it Service Request Management, and so on and so forth. The application that I'm going to build in today's video is just something very simple. One, manage invoices. The only reason why I add that one as a prefix, if you look here on the left-hand side, all of my applications are going to be in alphabetical order. And if I put a number in front, it's going to place this application at the very top of my list. And just for the sake of being able to find this application easier, this is the only reason why I add this one as a prefix. Normally, I wouldn't do that. So let me click Finish. Now you're going to be able to see this application listed here at the very top of your list. Next step, we need to open up this application. And once you open the app, you're going to be able to see a list of objects on the left-hand side. And we're going to be using these objects to build our application. And the very first place where we always want to begin is going to be the tables object. Tables are the foundation of any app that you develop inside Caspio. This is where all of your data is going to reside. In this particular workflow, we're going to need 3 tables. Table for customers, table for invoices, and a table to see all of the items within each invoice. So if you think about it, this application workflow will require 2 one-to-many relationships because customers can be linked to many invoices and each invoice can be linked to multiple items within that invoice. So let's build 3 tables for this workflow. I'm going to begin by clicking on this link New Table. And let's start with the customer table first. Let me add all of my fields very quickly, and then I'll explain some of the important data types for each of the fields. So at this point, if you want to practice along with the video, go ahead and pause and then copy all of the fields and data type that you see in the video to your own table. But let me point out some of the important data types here. Each customer inside my table needs to have a unique ID. So I chose to go with a random data type. You can see how Caspio flagged it as a unique field. In a database application, that's commonly referred to as the primary key to uniquely identify each row inside your table. I have first name, last name, that's text 255. I also have full name. Now for my full name field, I chose formula data type. When you click on the formula data type, you're going to click on the edit link here to the right. And inside this window, I have injected my first name field using this drop-down picker. So I added my first name. Then to create the space in between my first and last name, I added a plus sign, apostrophe, space, one more apostrophe, a plus sign, and then the last name next to it. This creates a space in between your first and last name inside a table. Typically what I like to do is add my first name in its own field, last name in its own field, and I like to concatenate both the first and last name together into a third field. Then we have title, company name, phone, email, and all the other attribute fields for our customers. Once you're done adding all of these fields, go ahead and save your table. And let's give it a name. I'm going to call this Demo Invoices Customers. Something completely random. Obviously, you can go with your own naming convention, so whatever preference you have as far as naming your tables, you can give that table whatever name you want. I'll click Finish. And here's my very first table. Let's open the table now. And what you'll notice that it's an empty table. We don't have any data inside it. Let's quickly add some dummy information to this table so that later on we can test the application correctly as long as we have some data inside this table. So just bear with me for a moment while I add some of the information to this table. So I added 2 customers to my table. Notice how inside this table every single customer has a unique ID. We have their names. You can see how my formula field is concatenating both the first and last name together into its own field. And we have the rest of the information pertaining to each customer. Let's build additional 2 tables. Let's go back out to the Tables menu, click New, and let's create the table now that's going to store all of our invoice information. And again, just like in the previous table, let me quickly add all of my fields and then I'll explain the important data types. So again, just like in the previous table, go ahead and pause the video now and copy whatever fields you see in the video to your own table so that you can practice along and learn how to use the Caspio platform efficiently. For my invoice number, notice I'm using once again random ID because each time you create an invoice in this table, we want to apply a unique ID to that invoice. I have a customer ID field in this table. This becomes my foreign key. And all we're going to be doing, and you'll see later on how we take the customer ID from the customer table and we stamp the customer ID inside the invoices table. This is how we link our invoices to our customers. And again, this is going to be a one-to-many relationship because each customer can be linked to multiple invoices. Then we have our standard fields. We have company, address, city, state, and zip. This is going to be who we bill to. Then we have date of issue. You're going to see that's a date and time data type. Payment due date, that's date and time as well. So just common date fields that we need to have in our table. And then date created, I chose to go with the timestamp so that we can automatically stamp the date and time when this invoice was created. Let's save the table now. And let's follow the same naming convention. So let's go with demo, TBL for table, invoices. So this table is going to store all of your customer information, and this table is going to store all of your invoice information. Now let's create our last table that's going to store multiple items for each invoice. So let's create a new table. And let me go ahead and quickly add all the fields that I need in this table. Okay, so as mentioned before, go ahead and pause the video and add these fields to your table so you can follow along in parallel with the video. So for my log ID, each item inside this table will need to be flagged with its own unique ID. So I chose random ID once again. We have invoice number. So this becomes our foreign key because we're going to be taking the invoice number, which is the primary key in the invoices table, and we're going to be stamping that ID inside the logs table. Then we have quantity in terms of hours. This field is going to be used how long it took us to complete a certain project. We have the description field, that's self-explanatory, and then we have the unit price labor rate. So whatever item it is that you purchased, if it's a part item, we want to be able to assign a cost to the part. And if it's labor and we specify how many hours it took us to complete the job, we want to be able to specify in terms of labor cost. So what do we charge per hour? And for that data type, we want to go with currency. Description is going to be text 64,000 so that we can input more data. Quantity in terms of hours, that's going to be a number data type. And then once you're done, go ahead and save your table. And let's give it a name. Demo, invoice, items. And we have officially created all three tables for this application. The last thing that you want to do is simply connect your tables together using those primary keys and foreign keys so that you understand your schema and structure and how all of your tables are linked together. And we're going to do that by going into the relationship screen. So go ahead and include your tables here inside this window. I'm going to include my customer table first, then my invoices, and then the items that belong to each invoice. If you have an Access background or if you worked with SQL in the past, this screen is very beneficial. You can actually move these tables anywhere you want, however you want. You can also expand and collapse each table. But let's go ahead and make the connections between our primary keys and foreign keys. Again, it's very simple. We take the primary key from the customer table and we drag this line over to the customer ID in the child table of invoices. And once you let go of this line, you're going to get this pop-up window and you'll see how Caspio immediately identified this to be a one-to-many relationship because each customer can be linked to multiple invoices. Let's click on Create. And even by looking at these symbols, you will see number one and you will see many. This basically lets you know that, again, one customer can be linked to many invoices. Now we have one more connection to make here. We want to drag the invoice number from this table to the invoice number in the items table. Again, you'll see a one-to-many connection. Let's click on Create. And basically what we're looking with this connection is that each invoice can have multiple items inside it because we're tracking parts, we're tracking labor, and you could have multiple items listed inside each invoice. You can actually expand upon this workflow. If you wanted to have a user table for each customer, they can log in and be able to see their own invoices. So you could create that type of a functionality. If you'd like to learn how to do that, we do have other videos on our YouTube channel that explain how you can actually have user roles, how people can log in to view their own data using record level security. This video will just focus on the workflow of the invoices, but I just want you to keep in mind that you could add that component to it if you would like your customers to log in, or if you would like your employees to log in and be able to manage customers and their invoices. Now that we have all of our tables created, let's move on to data pages and let's build out all of the functionality. Let's save all the layouts and let's begin building all of our forms and reports. Let's begin with the web form. I'm going to click on this link here at the top, and this is going to launch Caspio's point-and-click data page wizard. And here you can select the type of application interface you want to create. Now, as I mentioned, let's go ahead and begin with a submission form because I would like to be able to create a new invoice. So let's click Next. As for my data source, I'm going to select my invoices table because when I submit the form, I want that information to be stored inside the invoices table. Let's give this data page a name. I'm going to call this Create New Invoice, something very simple. Let's apply a different style. Styles are all about the aesthetics, the look and feel of your forms and reports. I'm going to choose blue. Let's also use a different localization. Localizations are all about the regional settings in terms of how you format your date field, what language you use, and perhaps currency. Let's click Next. Now I need to select what fields I wish to use in the web form. Let's move all of the fields to the right. On this screen, I also need to pass the ID on exit. And what this means, when I submit the form, I need to pass the invoice number to the subsequent page. Because when I pass the invoice number to the next page, on that page, I'm going to have a report that's going to receive that invoice number and stamp that invoice number in the items table. Because if I have the invoice number in the items table, now I can reference back and link my invoices to my items because we'll have a common value between both of those two tables. Let's continue. For my customer ID field, I'm going to choose to have this be a dropdown. And instead of custom values, I'm going to do both lookup table and custom values, which creates an additional tab here for us. The first option in my dropdown is going to say select customer. Make sure you delete the value. You don't want this to be stored in your table. This needs to carry a null value, and it'll be the very first option in your dropdown. For the lookup table, we're going to link this back to our customer table. Field for display, full name so that I can see the customer's name, and field for value is still going to be the customer ID so that I can stamp the customer ID in the invoice table. This is how you link your invoices to your customers. The remaining address fields are going to use cascading text field because when I select the customer, I would like to automatically populate all of the address fields based on that customer. So let's see how we can do that. When I select the company field, in this dropdown, we're going to choose cascading text field. Your parent field is going to be the customer ID, which is the field right above. We're going to link this back to our customer table, and then filter cascade by customer ID, and then field for value is going to be the company name field. And let's go to repeat the same step for the remaining fields. We're going to go to the address field, cascading text field. Customer ID is still the parent field. We need to select our customer table. And in the second dropdown, we choose address. For our two date fields, we're going to choose to have a calendar pop-up. You'll see in just a moment what that looks like. And once you're done configuring all of these fields, you can click on the preview button. And now you'll see when you select your customer, let's say Samantha, you can see how we automatically populate all of the address fields because we're pulling that information from the customer table where that data already exists. And I can also use a calendar pop-up to select the date of issue and also payment due date. Now upon submission, we're going to be redirected to a new web page. So let's go back to Caspio and let's see how we can do that. So back inside my account, we're going to hit next. And as I said, instead of seeing a confirmation message, I want to redirect the user to a new page. And on that page, we're going to have a report that allows us to add all of these items, parts, labor, etc. Now it's completely up to you what page URL you use. If I go to my Weebly account, on my website, if you want this exact workflow, you're going to need to have 6 different web pages created. These are my 2 main web pages, which are exposed in the main navigation menu. You can see customers and you can see new invoice. I also have 4 hidden web pages. So when you create a web page in Weebly, let's say you create a standard page, you can choose to include that page in the main navigation menu, or you can choose to hide that from the navigation menu, which is what I did for those 4 web pages. And you'll see in just a few minutes why we choose to hide those web pages. Once you're done creating your web page, you can click on Done, and you're going to be able to see it listed here with all of your other web pages. I'm going to go ahead and remove this one by clicking on this symbol here and just clicking on Delete and removing that web page completely. And just by looking at my web pages, you can see I have created this one here that allows me to add invoice items. So I'm going to link my form to that web page. So let's go back to my account. And let's link that to this page called add invoice items.html. What's going to happen here is when you hit submit and we go to this web page, we need to pass the invoice number to that web page. So a little bit of syntax is needed here. We need to add a question mark to initiate the string. For my invoice number parameter, I'm going to call this IID, which stands for invoice ID. It's just an abbreviation. Then we're going to add an equal sign. And then using this picker that we have in the dropdown, we're going to choose invoice number and click OK. So let me just recap on what we're doing here. When we submit new invoice form, upon submission, we're going to go to this URL, and in the midst, we're going to be passing the invoice number to that web page called add invoice items.html. Let me click finish. Let's deploy this form. I'm going to click on this link, enable deployment status, grab my embed code and copy it. Let's go back to Weebly. And now in order for me to add that form to my web page, it's going to be this one here, new invoice. Let's click on it. Let's go to build. Let's move the embed code to the right. It's very simple. Once you let go, you can click inside the canvas here to edit your HTML. and just paste the Caspio code. Hit publish, and we should now be able to see that form embedded into our website. So my customers page doesn't have any information on it just yet, but when I go to new invoice, we're going to be able to see that form. I can now select my customer, let's say Tom. It's going to populate that information from the table. Let's select our date of issue and also payment due date. Click submit, and upon submission, you can see how I'm going to be redirected to that page at invoiceitems.html, and in the process, we're passing the invoice number to that page. Now let's build a data page on this web page that we're going to receive the invoice ID and add all of those items to our invoice list. So let's create a report that's going to display all of the items linked to each invoice. Back inside Caspio, we're going to build a brand new data page. And this time we're going to select reports, and let's go with the tabular format and hit next. My data source needs to be my items table, because again, when I add an item to this table, I want to be able to store that information inside my items table. Let's give it a name. Just simple, add new item. For my style, I'll once again choose blue, and my localization, I'll choose English, and click next. I don't need to create a search form. Let's go ahead and filter data based on a predefined criteria. And then on the next screen, this report also needs to receive the invoice ID. Remember from the submission form, when we submit the form, we're passing the IID to the subsequent page, which is essentially going to be this page, and this page also now needs to receive that ID. This is how we're going to know what item we're adding for what invoice. So let's filter our results based on the invoice number. Click next. Go into the Advanced tab, and now to receive that value, we check the box, select External Parameters, and we choose IID as my parameter name, because that's where I called it. If you recall back from the destination screen on the submission form, we added that URL add invoice number, question mark, IID equals, and then the invoice number that we pass as a field. The value must be required. We're going to click next. And now choose what fields you want to have on the results page. I'm going to include all of the fields except for the log ID. I don't really need to display that on the results page, so I'm going to exclude that and click next. Now choose what editing capability you want to have on that results page. Let's do an inline insert so that we can add a line item from the very top of our results page. Let's do an inline edit so that we can edit as well. Don't worry about the warning message. This is just a precaution to let you know if your data page is not password protected, anyone's going to be able to edit your invoice items. We're not worried about that in this use case. Let's just click OK. And then let's also do an inline delete so that we can delete any of the items if we make a mistake. Let's click next. Let's move the type field to the very top. I also want to enable data grouping so that we can group all of our items if they belong to parts or if they belong to labor. Let's have a collapsible group, and let's have it be expanded by default. On the editing tab, I want to create a very quick drop down here to be able to select a type. Make sure you delete the value. You don't want that to be stored in your table. And then we have two different types. We have parts and we have labor. So these two items are going to be in our drop down to choose from. For invoice number, now a little bit of configuration is necessary in order to stamp the invoice number inside the items table. So I'm going to choose to hide this field and then use the external parameter. And now a little bit of syntax is needed here. Remember on exit, when we submit the form, we pass the invoice ID. Now we need to insert that invoice ID inside the field. And to do that, we're going to just add a little bit of text here, insert record, and then invoice number. This syntax is needed in order to now receive that value and be able to stamp that value inside the items table. Quantity hours, I'm not going to make any changes here. We're going to leave that the way it is. Description field is going to be left as is. And then for this label, maybe we can change this from unit price to unit cost and / labor rate. Now, a few more things we need to add to this report. I need to insert a calculated field. Let's move that down, and let's call this amount. And we need to compute hours times labor rate. So we're going to include those two fields. Let's go with the hours first, and then very simple times attribute here. It's a very simple multiplication, labor rate. And let's format this field. So we're going to click on the formatting button, choose custom, and let's format as currency and just have 2 digits after the decimal. Whatever preference you have, you can choose however many digits you want to have after the decimal. Click OK. Let's add one more for totals and aggregation. My function is going to be the sum because I want to be able to add all of the line items together on the amount field. Okay, so by default, you'll see it's selected as sum. We're going to format this. Once again, custom, currency. And again, I'll have 2 digits after the decimal and click OK. The last thing that I need to add to my report, again, I need to insert an element here, and we're going to choose header and footer. And in the footer section, what I need to create is a link that's going to pass the invoice ID to another page where we can now customize the look and feel of our invoice. So to create that link in Caspio, it's very easy. You can just give it a name if you want to. Let's call this Generate Invoice. Let's highlight the text. Click on the link button, and now your destination URL. So when I click on this text, where do I want the end user to go? If I go back to my Weebly account, let's take a look at all of my pages. I have a page here called Invoice Details. So when I click on that link, I want the end user to be redirected to this page. So let's go back to my account and let's call this invoice details.html. Again, you have to add the question mark to initiate the string, IID, which is invoice ID, and now we need to display that parameter here. So add a square bracket, IID, and then close the square bracket. This allows you to display the ID that you passed from the submission form. Click OK. And you will see how it becomes a clickable text. One thing you may want to do here is click on the source button and just remove the HTTP after your quotes. That way the entire URL remains relative, and then we can carry over the entire URL domain along with invoicedetails.html. Once you remove the HTTP, just click on the source button again, and you're going to see your link once again. When done, click Next. Choose how many records you want per page. I'm going to leave it as 25. Click Next, and just go ahead and disable the details page. You don't really need to have a details page in this use case. When done, click Finish to save your changes. And then from here, click on Deploy, enable deployment status, and then grab your embed code. Once again, copy it. And just like the submission form, we're going to go back to Weebly, go to our pages. And I need to add that to this page called Add Invoice Items. We're going to go to Build here. Move the embed widget to the right, click on Edit, and then paste our Caspio code and hit Publish. And let's go ahead and test this out. I'm going to click on the link here at the top. Let's go to New Invoice, and let's select our customer. Let's once again choose Samantha, choose our 2 date fields, click Submit, and here's my report. Now I can add all of these line items to each invoice if I want to by first selecting my type. Let's go with parts. Let's choose maybe 3. How about something simple like pipes? And let's say we paid $59 per pipe. We're going to click Add. We can also add our labor. Let's say it took us 2 hours to install everything. We're going to call this installation. And we charge $75 per hour. We're going to click Add. And you can see how we're able to get the total here on the right column, and we're using totals and aggregation to get the grand total for all of these items. I will teach you how you can add tax as well once we start customizing the invoice. But now what we can do is click on this link to generate the invoice. However, when I click on the link now, you will see how it takes me to that web page where it says Invoice Details. Now let's go back to Caspio and learn how we can develop that page to display our company name, all the address fields, invoice number, and how we can include the itemized list of all of the invoiced items. Let's go back to Caspio and let's create a view that joins 2 tables together. We're going to join the customer table to the invoice table. Now that we have a common value between them, which is the invoice ID, we can merge those 2 tables together. So let's click on New View here at the top. Let's give it a name, Demo, Customers, and Invoices. So let's move over to the customer table. Let's move over to invoice table, click Next, and you'll see how Caspio immediately defined that relationship for me as an inner join because we're only displaying the matching records from both tables. You do have some flexibility here to edit the view if you want to display all records from the customer table or all records from the invoice table. I'm going to choose to display just the matching records from both tables. Click Next, and then here you're going to be able to see the fields from both tables. The reason why I want to join these two tables together is when I display the invoice, I need to be able to pull information from both tables. I need to be able to pull my customer info, and I also need to be able to pull my information from the invoices table, which has the due date and also the date of issue. So let's click Finish to save our changes. There's my view. If you open the view now, you're going to be able to see all of the linked entries between the customers and also the invoices. Let's go back to data pages now, and let's build that data page to display the invoice. Click New Link here at the top. We're going to go down to Reports, and let's have just the Details data page. Click Next. The data source table needs to be the view that we just created, which is a combination of both of those two tables. Again, I'm going to use the same style and same localization. And let's give it a name. View Invoice Details. Click Next. I need to filter data based on a predefined criteria. Click Next. My filtering field needs to be the invoice number because the details page also needs to receive the invoice ID that we're passing from the report. So if you remember, when I click on Generate Invoice Link, I pass the invoice ID. The details page now needs to receive that invoice ID. So we're going to click Next. Going to the Advanced tab, receive the value externally. And we call this IID. So let's make sure we have the same naming convention, IID. Value must be required. We're going to click Next. And now you can choose what information you want to display on the details page. I'm going to teach you a trick here where you can actually, instead of using these fields on the right-hand side, go ahead at this point, just include any field, just one field. We're going to hit Next. And in the details view, we're going to use the HTML blocks, and inside those HTML blocks, we're going to feed those values as parameters because inside the HTML block, we have a lot more flexibility in terms of how we organize our layout. So here I can add an HTML block. And inside the HTML block, what I typically like to do is I like to go into the Advanced tab and disable the HTML editor. That way we get rid of that toolbar. And now here in this window, I can add any HTML that I want. And it's completely up to you how you customize this page. So for example, if I wanted to add the company information, who the invoice is coming from, I can say something like this. This creates bold text. So let's just say our company name is Acme Incorporated. Let's close the B tag. Then I'm going to add a line item to create a new line or new row. And then we're going to list the company address. So for example, 123 street name, something random. Then let's go with another line item. And then let's just have just city, state, and just some random zip code. And basically what I've created with this is just our company name, our address, and our city, state, and zip. It's fictitious information. I'm not including any sensitive data here. Now let's create two rows between the company address and any other information that we want to list down below. So again, I'll use the bold tag and I'll say bill to, something very simple like this. And underneath that now I can include the fields as parameters from the view by using the insert button. And perhaps the first thing that we can add is the full name of the customer. Okay, then create the line break. And then underneath that, we can include all the other customer information. So for example, you can include the company name. Let's add one more line break. Now I'm not going to include all of them, just a few, just so you can get the idea how we can customize this. And let's just have the address field as well. But as I mentioned, you can include as many fields as you want here. If you want to add more spacing between what we're going to have is the list of items, I'm just going to create two more line breaks to make it a little bit cleaner so that we have more space. And then what I need to do next is add one more HTML block. Let's move that underneath our field name. And what we're going to do is we're going to hide the field. We don't need to actually display this field inside our invoice because I already have this field displayed inside the HTML block as full name. And in order for us to hide the field in this first HTML block, we're going to add a little bit of code here. It's very simple. We just add a div tag style equals, and then in between the quotes, we're going to say display none, semicolon, close your quotes, and just add one more div here. And now in the second HTML block, again, we're going to disable the HTML editor and just close the div tag like this, twice. Okay, so just let me recap here really quickly so you know exactly what's happening. In the first HTML block, we have some information displayed. Then we want to hide that field. So we need to wrap that field in between two HTML blocks. And in the second HTML block, we just close both of the div tags that were opened up here in the first HTML block. Now what I need to do is include an iframe. So this is very neat. In Caspio, you can take one data page, you can deploy it as an iframe, and you can include that iframe in a second data page. This gives us the ability to display information from both data pages in a single view. But before I can do that, I need to create that data page that's going to list all the items for the invoice. So I'm going to click Finish here to save my changes, and we'll come back to this in just a minute. Let's go ahead and deploy this data page, just so that you can see what it looks like. We're going to enable, grab the embed code, copy it, and let's go to Weebly. Here's my invoice details page, and inside Weebly, let's go to Pages. Let's go to Invoice Details. Let's go to Build, and let's move the embed code widget. We'll click inside it, edit our HTML, and paste that invoice details data page that we just created and click Publish. So now if we test this out, let's just say we go to New Invoice, we select Samantha, we'll just choose two random dates, click Submit. Let's just add one item. So for example, parts, 3. We'll just say pipe and 75 and click Add. And now when I generate the invoice, we're going to pass the invoice ID to this page, and you can now see how we're displaying information pertaining to our company name and also Samantha's information along with Samantha's company information. What I need to do next is to display the list of items that we just created for this invoice. So let me create an additional data page here so that you can see how we can display those items in a nice format. So back to Caspio. Click on New Data Page, and I will quickly set up this other data page for us, which is the reports. Let's go with the tabular format, hit Next. The data source needs to be based on the items because we're trying to output the information from this table. Let's call this View Invoice Items. Again, I'm going to use the same style and same localization. Click Next. Let's have a predefined report. Click Next. Based on the invoice number, so let's move that to the right. Click Next again. And in the Advanced tab, we need to receive this value. Again, it's all tied together using the IID, parameter name. Value must be required, and we're going to hit Next. Now, the fields that I want to include in my results page are going to be type, quantity, description, and unit cost / labor rate. We're going to hit Next. I'm not going to edit any information this time because this report just needs to display the data because I'm getting ready to generate my list of items for that invoice. So there's no need to edit that information. So we leave everything as read only. Click Next. For type, let's also enable data grouping and stick with standard result set. We don't need to expand and collapse our data here. Not going to make any changes here for quantity hours, description, same thing, unit price. I could update my label here to just say unit cost / labor rate. And now let's add some calculations here. So I need to have my amount field, same way as before. We're going to move this down. Let's call it amount. Let's add our two fields to compute that, which is the hours. And very simple here, times unit price labor. And again, we want to format this as well as custom currency. And we want 2 digits after the decimal and click OK. Now for my first aggregation, let's include totals and aggregation here. It'll be on the amount field. And let's call this one to be tax. So we'll say tax, and then in parentheses, we'll just say 9.25%. And then we're going to do a custom formula here. And for formula, I want to be able to do sum times 0.0925, which is going to take the sum on the amount field and times it by 0.0925 to give us our tax. And then now let's include our second totals and aggregation here. Okay, I'm going to move this down. And for this one, we're once again going to move the amount field to the right. We're going to do a custom formula, which is going to be, once again, sum times 1.0925. And from here, you can format this column as well to get your currency and specify how many digits you'd like to have after the decimal point. Click OK. Let's continue now. We're going to hit Next. In the Advanced tab, I'm going to say Hide Record Count because we don't want to be able to display the records. It just needs to be a clean view of all the items in that invoice. Let me go back to the Standard tab and just disable the interactive sorting. Click Next, and now let's disable the Details page and click Finish. And watch what I'm going to do next. I will deploy this data page, enable deployment status, grab the frame, copy it. I'll go back to my other data page, which is View Invoice Details. I'm going to click Edit. Let's click Next a few times until we get to our HTML block. And inside that second HTML block, I'm going to paste that iframe like this so that we can display the list of items directly underneath that details view. I now need to modify my iframe a little bit. And what I'm going to do here is very simple here. After iframe, I want to be able to have a frame border equals 0. Okay, so there's no border around my iframe. And I also want to change the width of my iframe to be 1000. And also the height of my iframe, I would also like to be 1000, like this. And the last thing that I need to do here is to add and pass the value, which is IID, to my iframe, because this is how the iframe is going to know what information to display in the list of all the invoice items. So we put a question mark here, IID equals, and then we need to display the parameter, which we need a square bracket at IID, and we close the square bracket. Once you pass that ID to this iframe, this is how we're going to know what information to display. So to test this out, we're going to hit Finish to save our changes. Let's refresh. And now you're going to be able to see the list of items displayed inside that report, which gives us a grand total that includes the parts and the total. Now you can further customize the look and feel of this report if needed. It's up to you and what preference you have. I'm going to stop at this point and just show you how you can now download this to a PDF. So I'll go back to Caspio once again. I'm going to edit that data page. Let's hit Next a few times. And on this screen, we can now enable PDF. I can customize the way all of my information is displayed. If I don't want to have anything inside the header or the data page name, I can remove that. I can put a logo here, and if I add a logo, now it's going to put that logo onto my PDF. You can choose the behavior. You can either download the PDF as a PDF file, or you can open up in a new browser. Let's go ahead and say open up in a new browser and click Save. I'll refresh once again. And now when I click on this link, it's going to open up a new tab for me, and it puts all of that information onto a printable PDF. From here, I can download it, or I can print that invoice and archive it for my files. If you need help customizing the appearance of your invoice, contact our support team. They're going to be more than happy to assist you with how you lay out your content on that details page. The whole idea behind this video, the main thing that we should take away is how we take the iframe deployment and how we put that iframe into another data page to be able to display items if we receive the ID inside the iframe. I hope that you enjoyed the video. If you want to see how to create the remaining data pages from the live example, take a look at the YouTube video. In the description, you're going to see a link that allows you to download all of the tables and all of the data pages, including how I laid out my details page, so you can grab my HTML and CSS if you would like to copy and replicate the same type of a look. Or as I mentioned, you can contact our support team if you need some assistance in getting your own look and feel in terms of how you want that data to be laid out. Thanks for watching the video. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments, please use the comment section below. For additional information and articles on how to use Caspio, keep it right here on our YouTube channel or visit our knowledge base at howto.caspio.com. Thanks for watching and have a good day.